Ken Schoen with the Jewish Historical Society of Western Massachusetts. I have the pleasure of interviewing
David Edelman.
I'd like to ask Rabbi Edelman if you tell us about your memories of this particular building we're sitting in today. What does this represent to you, this building?
Yeah, I was sent here in 1950 by the Lubavitcher Rabbi in New York to become the principal of the Lubavitcher Yeshiva here in Springfield. And a few months after I came, we bought the building right here on 188 Sumner Avenue from the Sinai Temple.
What date?
1950.
1950. And the building was in beautiful condition. It was all set up. We had a main room for services they used to have. And we put in an ark for the Torah, and we had services here for Shabbos. But the main thing here was the school itself. We set up the school. We had a kindergarten. We had the classrooms from 1 to 8. And we were very happy in this building. At that time, the Jewish community was still flourishing in the North End. There were 4 synagogues in the North End, and a lot of Jews still lived there. And gradually, the community started moving out. But at that time, it was a flourishing community with Jewish butchers all around on Dwight Street, and Jewish bakeries and Jewish groceries. It was a very vibrant Jewish community. And they're all moving up into this neighborhood, and the Kedima Shul was a large synagogue, very well attended. And the building that we are in now, this 188 Sumner Avenue, was a focal point. Everyone walked by here, they saw the building and saw the sign, and they came in. Very warm place. We also had services here on the high holidays, Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and we had a big Sukkah party for all the adults and children in Springfield. They all came here. This was a very wonderful meeting place for the Jewry of Springfield.
So this was your shul. This was the shul.
This was the shul, and as well as the school. Well, the yeshiva here together.
When you came here in 1950, did the academy exist, or you had to create?
No, it was here already.
Who was running it?
They were being run by Rabbi Gordon, who left here to go to Newark, take over a big school there, and I came over after him. And the building was on Belmont Avenue, a little house. And as soon as I came, I sold the house and bought the building here. It's the first thing I did.
And how did you recruit youngsters to come here? How many students were there, and how did you get more?
Well, we advertised in the paper, and I went down on the high holidays, and I made an appeal on all the 4 synagogues in the North End. All the 4 shuls. They were so nice to us and so welcoming to us that I should come in. And we made an appeal, mainly for children, and there also was an appeal for funds. The older shuls were very happy to help us out.
Were there any other yeshivas around?
No.
This was it?
This was it.
How many students did you have your first years?
We had 60 students here.
The first years?
Yeah, and this it grew up there, about 60
About
students.
60.
60 students here.
The kindergarten was boys and girls, but the rest of the school was?
At that time, the rest of the school was all boys.
And so it came from all the different shuls?
Yeah, that was it. The majority of the students came from the North End. We had a big bus that picked them up. Went all over the city, picked up the children every morning and took them home.
And can you tell us the names of some of the teachers? The English teachers and the Hebrew teachers and the Torah teachers?
Well, we had Rabbi Ben-Zion Friedman was with me at that time. And there was a Rabbi Goldman here for a while. There was a Rabbi Engel. A lot of teachers came for a year or two and then they left. Some were single, and when they got married, they left. And we had the English principal, Mrs. McCusick, Ava McCusick, from West Springfield. Fantastic teacher. From the family of teachers. Her mother was a teacher. Her grandmother was a teacher. She knew how to teach. The children did so wonderful with her.
And this was first to sixth grade, eighth grade.
Eighth grade.
Eighth grade. And when they finished here, where did they go?
Where did they go? We had an afternoon school that they would come, but there was no other place in the city. They went to public school, and they did very well. They did very well. They're very well prepared.
And you were also teaching here, weren't you?
I taught. Oh yeah, I taught all the years. I taught half a day.
And what did you teach?
I taught the Hebrew subject. I taught the Gemara class, the Talmud class. It was a very nice group of students there. And the other half a day, I was the principal. I ran the rest of the school and took care of the financial and hiring.
How much did it cost to run the school?
Well, I remember for years and years I was thinking, who knows, maybe we'll reach $100,000 a year, but we never did, quite in this building.
And what would it cost a parent to send the youngster here? Do you remember that at all?
At that time, we charged $1,000 a year.
That was a lot of money.
That was not easy for many parents if they had 2 or 3 children. It was not easy.
And was there support? Was there any Jewish federation or any Jewish other organizations there that could help parents?
We didn't, at that time, we only had the tuition and general funding for individuals in the city. There was the Katz family who owned the country club Soda, and they were like the founders, and they took care of the school. They were very wealthy people and very religious, the old 3 people. There were 2 brothers and their brother-in-law, and they were in shul every day, morning and night. They went to the davening. They were wonderful people.
And did you have Talmud classes here for adults also,
Yeah,
like a Beit Midrash?
We started a Talmud class, and it's still going on today for adults. And for many years we had Rabbi Shenkop, who came and he gave the lecture. And this is one of the finest lectures given to any group in the country. He was a genius, and he just had a love of learning. He was right here.
What years was that about? Was that 1950s or
It
later?
was in the 50s into the 60s, yes. And that office room, the first room, we had the class there. And Lehman would come, Lezer Stambowski considers himself the gabbai of that class. And he made sure in the winter there would be a hot drink, in the summer cold. He took care.
And where were you and the Rebbitzin living while you had this yeshiva here?
Well, from 1950 to 54, we lived in the North End.
Where in the North End?
Right on Bancroft Street. That's right near Dwight. Right, that's where the hub of the shuls were, right there. And then we moved up into the park section to be closer to the school.
And where did you move to in the park?
We moved to Elwood Drive. We were not another street a few blocks away before.
Can you recall, let's go to the North End for a minute. What are your memories of the North End? Can you recall some of the places you shopped, the butchers and the bakers and...
The Magaziner's Bakery in Chernak was the butcher. And there was a big grocery store where everybody would meet. And they had a big barrel of pickles out in front. It was just like you read about it in the east side of New York. That store was there. And everyone met there. Everyone exchanged greetings there. That was the meeting place in the North End.
This was still Ferry Street?
Yeah. Ferry Street was business. Ferry Street also had a butcher shop and also had a bakery.
What street are you talking about?
I'm talking about Dwight Street.
Dwight Street.
Dwight Street. Yeah, but Ferry Street was the beginning where they all started. All the businesses started on Ferry Street, and then they moved down.
And it was a real Jewish neighborhood.
Very Jewish neighborhood, yeah. You went on Yontif, everybody was dressed in Yontif clothes, and the kids would walk from one shul to the other, to see each other. It was very, very nice. Very nice.
And who were the rabbis in those days, in those shuls?
Rabbi Shenkov.
What congregation did he have?
He was the chief rabbi of the city. It's called all the 4 synagogues.
Uh-huh.
And officially, with the big shul paid him his regular salary. But he was the rabbi of the other shuls too, of the Kesser Israel, and of the Jacob. That was all, and the Rosh Hashanah shul right down on Dwight Street itself. He took care of all the 4 synagogues very well.
So would there be questions, Shelot, and he would answer? He was like a chief rabbi.
He was the chief rabbi.
Do you recall some of the issues that happened in those days? Some of the controversies? Machlochet in those days?
He ran the city well. The questions came up about kashrus and that. He was very good. Took care very well.
What became of him?
He passed away, but he retired. When he retired, he was in the home for a couple of years, and then he passed away.
What's your memory of the Rosh Shul?
The Rosh Shul was a very warm place to daven. The whole shul was just a warm feeling. Before the davening, people would come in, they said Psalm, they didn't waste any time talking. They would say Tillim. Say Tillim in the shul, and they come together. I loved the daven. I used to read the Torah for them there. It was a very nice, good place.
Who was the rabbi there?
Schenker.
Oh, that was Schenker's shul. Now, why did the North... Was there any opposition to urban renewal when they knocked down the whole neighborhood?
That happened after they left.
They had already left. Why did they leave?
Why did they leave?
Yeah, why did the Jewish community kind of...
Well, the people became more affluent and they moved into the park, and the old people went to go to heaven. And the children didn't stay in the North End. They moved out. At that time, when I came to Springfield, there were 8 rabbis that were shachtim. They shachted the chickens and stuff. 8.
8.
And every chicken market had a shechet.
You actually had chicken markets attached to the butcher shops, I guess.
Yeah, there were no frozen chickens in the world then. If you wanted a chicken for Shabbos, you went to the chicken market. You picked out a chicken, the shechet shachted it for you, and the workers there plucked the feathers. You had to go home and open the chicken and kasher it with salt. To kasher it to make it kosher, and the same thing with the meat. You bought meat, you had to go home and kasher it. It's a different world today.
Who were the shachets then? Do you remember them?
I remember Falk was a shechet, and Friedman was a shechet, and then Levine was the chazan in the Beth Israel. A very great musician, a short guy, but he was a talented musician, and he would make a choir for the high holidays, expensive choir, and he would direct that choir. He really knew. Beautiful. They had a big crowd always the high holidays in the Beth Israel, and he was the chazan shechet. Then in the Congress Street shul, they called it, was Rabbi Siegel, who was an Israeli, also a scholar, quite a scholar. And he was a good chazan, and he also had a choir. These 2 shuls always had a choir. So when the Kadima opened up, they also had a choir. They couldn't, if the downtown had a choir, up here, surely they needed a choir. But the high holidays was a very festive occasion. They sold tickets for who were new members. Everything went very high, very vibrant and strong Jewish community.
So Kadima had a choir too.
Yeah, but at that time, everyone in Springfield was kosher. Everybody kept kosher. Didn't you think of anything else?
And there were conservative shuls too, and reform shuls at that point, from your recollection?
I know that the Bethel started in the park section. They rented a place, and then the Sinai started in the building we're here now. They started in the late 40s.
Who was the rabbi? Do you remember who you dealt with?
Rabbi Snyder.
You have any memories of him?
Oh yeah, I had many talks with him over the years. He was very cooperative, and he loved. I mean, he came from a very traditional family himself, so he had a soft touch for all traditional Jews.
Let's go back for a moment to the Lubavitch Yeshiva Academy. I was given the names of some of the students. Let's see if you remember some, and maybe there are others you might mention, just for the record, who they were and what became of them, if you know. Elliot Levin?
Elliot Levin is still in town. We see him in shul every once in a while. A nice traditional Jew.
Joe Boxer?
Joe Boxer, I think, left town. I don't have any connection with him now. He's very nice.
Mark Sadowski?
Mark Sadowski is still in town. We see him once in a while.
What does he do for a living?
I think also he worked for the post office, I think, just like Elliot Levin. His mother still lives in town, Sadowski's mother, so I keep in touch with him.
Seema and Cyril Edelman?
That's my daughters.
Oh, those are your daughters, right, of course. Where are they?
Well, they're in New York now.
They're in New York. And Israel was a student here too, Yisrael.
Yeah, he's now in Florida,
Okay.
right in Boca, near Boca.
And how about Simon Fuchs?
Simon Fuchs became Dr. Simon Fuchs, and he was the city planner for the city of Baltimore, my hometown. A very great position.
Amy, can you remember them as students here?
Oh, yes.
You can picture them.
Oh, yes.
Amy Michaelman?
Amy and Michaelman, they didn't say the parents were here, but they moved out.
What did the parents do for a living?
A lawyer. About a lawyer.
Mike Cohen?
Mike Cohn, I lost track of Mike Cohn.
Joan Lefkowitz?
Lefkowitz, also they left town. The father was, got what he did here, but they left, they moved.
Gary Lubarsky?
Gary Lubarsky, the family was here for many years, and then they moved way out into the west somewhere.
Sharon Wolf?
Sharon Wolf, I have no connection with them.
Susan and Terry Pevner?
The Pesner family, I connect all the years. I see them from time to time. The twins.
Who else do you remember? Any other students from those days come to mind?
First time.
I know, I'm asking you to go back a long way.
Yeah.
The sense I get, it was a very joyous place.
Yes.
Having talked to Peter before, he has wonderful memories, and he said he got a very good education.
Yeah.
So it seems like you really put together a wonderful team in terms of the teaching. Let's get back to your career in Springfield. What became, when you moved from here, where did you move to, and what became of the academy?
Well, we were here approximately 15 years, and then we had a call from the state of Massachusetts, and they said, we don't want to push you. We heard you're looking for another location, but there are 4 schools in Massachusetts that are wooden buildings, and we don't want any. This was a wooden building. So that was, but he heard already we're looking, so he says, I don't want to push you. And we moved over to Oakland Street. Right now, when we bought the old Kadima, moved, and we bought the Hebrew school right next to them. They're both buildings.
Kadima had a Hebrew school next door.
Yeah, they built it was called United Hebrew School when it was built.
What students went to that Hebrew school? Because you had a Hebrew school here.
Yeah.
I mean, how was it different than your school?
That was only afternoon. No temples, no synagogues had their own Hebrew school. There was one Hebrew school for the whole city. And that's why you had such a large amount of students there. It's a large enrollment there.
One Hebrew school.
One Hebrew school. And they went twice a week. So some children went Monday and Wednesday, and others went Tuesday and Thursday. So they could handle a lot of children in this one building.
What was the level of education they got there?
Well, it was nice. It had nice teachers there.
Do you remember the teachers?
And the main thing, the school, they needed a place to get bar mitzvah for the kids. So that's why every family had their children there. They had to have a bar mitzvah. Yeah.
What did the building look like when you took it over, and how did it evolve or change into some other looking building? when you took over Kadima?
No, the Hebrew school was built for a school.
What about the synagogue, the shul
The
itself?
synagogue, it was an Orthodox synagogue. We just went in there. It was a pleasure.
No change.
And no change.
And what numbers did you have? How many people would come to shul on Shabbos back in the... When you moved there, it sounds like in the 60s.
With the 60s, we just had a million, about 15 people. And then we had some women would come, and a lot of kids would show up.
15 on Shabbos?
Yeah.
15.
15 Shabbos, yeah.
And maybe 5 of them were Edelmans?
And then,
Yeah.
was the other. And then for the holidays, we get a big crowd.
So when you were davening here, was that your number 2 on Shabbos, about 15?
That's right, yeah. And when we have a Rosh Hashanah and Kippur here, we squeezed almost 75, 80 people in that one room. It was packed. And then we went over to the Kadima. We had 125 people. We had a nice crowd for
For the holidays. How did you support this shul? 15 members is not a lot of members.
Well,
How were you able to keep it going?
The shul was not an expense we had. We had the building, we had a minyan. Understand? The expense was the teachers, the payroll, the school bus, the janitors, all that. That was the expense, not the shul part.
You had bought it outright.
No.
So heat was not an issue. Maintenance was not an issue then, the way it became today.
That's right. It was inexpensive. Inexpensive. And many of the people who sold the oil companies in Springfield were Jewish. And they donated a lot of the oil. And there were a lot of, we have a citywide membership like we have today. People help the school.
How would you distinguish Keser, what became Keser, from Kadima and from B'nai Jacob? What was different about each service? Why would the person, let's say, go to your shul as compared to going to the shul over here?
Just like when the old 4 synagogues were downtown.
Same question.
So each shul had a little different type of service. The Beth Israel was called Ashkenaz service. The Kesser was Nusach People went to daven Nusach Hari from Europe. And then the Bnei Yisrael, the Rosh Hashanah, daven Sfard, the Sfard of Europe, European Sfard. Because they came from the area of Volyn. Volyn was the area of Russia, near Romania, where the Baal Shem Tov came from. They're a real Hasidic background, and they davened Nusach Sfard. So in the city, you had all the 3 types of Nusach downtown.
What was Kadima doing? What kind of nusach when they...
Kadima Nusach Ashkenaz.
Uh-huh.
The Kadima would have, when I came up here, 400 people Saturday morning. 200 children downstairs service.
Every Shabbos.
Every Shabbos. Rabbi Norman Lamb was the rabbi.
And it was located over here on Oakland.
On Oakland Street.
400 people. And they all lived around the park, most of them?
Yeah. And that's why they built a new building, because in the high holidays, the shul held 400. Downstairs, they packed in another few hundred. But they needed a general sanctuary for everybody, so they built a new building that holds 1,000 people.
And they had the vision or thought that they could sustain this forever.
Yes.
That the Jewish community would be vibrant and maintain itself. What do you think happened? How did it evolve that we now face a situation with shuls closing?
Well, when the children grew up in Springfield, they went to college, and they got a taste of the larger cities, the larger communities, so they won't come back to Springfield. There's no continuation of the families here. That's a problem. And not too many new people are moving in. The city is not doing well financially. There's no employment for them, so it doesn't attract too many other Jewish families. That's a problem.
Could you foresee this happening 20 years ago?
No, Lubavitch always has a positive outlook on everything. You don't count people by numbers, you count people by the good deeds they do. And the city itself is very coherent. When the Federation calls a general meeting, the whole city comes. The whole city comes and takes part. When there was a crisis in Israel, they all come together, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, and they help and they do. It's a very...
When you look back, well, let me first ask you this. Tell me about your life before you came here. You said you came from Baltimore. Are you born in Baltimore?
I was born in Baltimore.
Who are your parents?
My parents were Cheska Meir, Edelman, and Toby, Tobalea.
Where are they from?
They're from Poland.
Where?
Near the big city of Lodz. But those days, people did not live in even big cities before World War I. They lived in small little villages, by the thousands. And my father came before World War I. He came here, he was a shoemaker, and he lived in Baltimore, and they brought my mother over after the war ended. They were married in Baltimore. And he was a Shomer Shabbos, he never worked Shabbos. He had his own shoe store, he didn't have to ask anybody.
And your grandparents?
My grandparents, one grandfather came to Baltimore, but I think before my father, he also was a shoemaker. My mother's parents and her family never came.
Were you trained as a shoemaker?
No, my father nor my brother. When we finished, there was a yeshiva there for the younger children. There was no high school there at that time in Baltimore, so I went to City College, they called that high school. And the day I graduated, the next day I went to New York to yeshiva to learn.
Which yeshiva did you?
Lubavitch yeshiva.
Were you already Lubavitch growing up?
No.
How did you find Lubavitch? How did that happen?
There was a great Lubavitcher rabbi in Baltimore. Very great scholar. He was one of the big shots in the world.
His name?
His name was, what's his first name? I don't think of his first name. And he was studying together with one of my friends, and for the summertime, he said, you know what, go to learn in New York. My rabbi made a yeshiva, a new yeshiva in 1941 in New York. And he served good meals and fresh food, and it's a good thing. And so that's why the next day, I went to Lubavitch yeshiva without knowing what it was. I had no idea. My friend took me, so we went. And I remained there until this day with the Lubavitch movement.
Who was running that? Yeah, who was running that then in New York?
Well, in Baltimore, this Rabbi Axelrod just had a big shul, a Lubavitcher shul. And when I came to New York, the Lubavitcher Rebbe started the yeshiva. Then the same day he got off the boat, he said there was very few boats were coming then, one of the last boats. And Rabbi Weisvogel, who lived here many years, was on the same boat. And so they knew it was coming. They built a big platform. And the government, the president sent some dignitaries and the governor, were thousands of people there to greet him when he came to this country.
Really?
And he was not well already. He had a stroke in Poland. And they carried him off on the stretcher. And they brought him over, and then he spoke. And he said, the reason I came here was to continue my work, which is teaching Jewish people, Jewish children. And I want the Lubavitch Yeshiva of America to start tomorrow morning. He says, I won't be able to go to sleep tonight till I know the yeshiva will start tomorrow.
And that's how it happened.
That's it. Now you understand the movement behind the whole Chabad. All the thousands and thousands of Chabad all over the whole world.
There was a connection with Springfield and the Lubavitcher Rebbe in
Yes.
Russia. Can you talk about that connection?
Yes. The Kesser Yisrael was one of the synagogues that the Lubavitcher Rebbe visited on his first trip in 1929. He came to America, and at that time there lived an attorney that was a Lubavitcher, an attorney in Springfield, Fred Rabinowitz, and Rabbi Eliezer Silver, the chief rabbi of the Agudas HaRabbanim of America, lived in Springfield. He was here for 6 years, and when they heard that Rebbe came to America, they invited him to come to Springfield. And Springfield, he was here for a day, and he stood overnight in the Hotel Charles at that time. One of the finest receptions that the Rebbe got in the whole United States was in Springfield. The city turned out by the thousands to greet him. And he went to the Kesser Israel at that time on Chestnut Street, and he gave a discourse of Chassidus, and then the rabbi, they walked over to the Beth Israel on Chestnut Street, but there were so many people there, they couldn't get inside, so the rabbi said, I'll speak on the top step, there's plenty of room here for everybody, and that's how he delivered a stirring talk to the Jews of Springfield. The honor they gave him and the friendliness, he was very impressed with Springfield. They put Springfield on the map on this visit here.
Was it also true that Springfield raised money to get the Rebbe out of prison?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. 10 years later, when the Rebbe was captured by the Nazis, so they needed money to rescue him. So that was in 1940. And for the 40. I came in 1950. 10 years later, when the Rebbe had been in America already, so the Jews in the Kesser Israel told me that we received a telegram from the office in New York to save the Rebbe from the Nazis. He's imprisoned by the Nazis. We need to send some money. And the share for Springfield is $900. So the President Kronitsky told me, we sent back the $900 by return telegram. We didn't waste a moment to save the Rebbe's life, and that's how he was saved. The money was sent over there, and his life was saved. And then he came to America.
So Springfield was very close to him.
Very close to him, yeah. And that's why he, when he started the Lubavitcher yeshivas, one of the first ones in 1945 was Springfield.
When you look back right now at your career here, can you think of some of the highlights, some of the high moments for you? Are there some that stand out?
I remember distinctly when we had the opening of this building. This building was very stirring. All the dignitaries came from the city, everybody was here. And my father-in-law of blessed memory was still alive, and he came from Boston. He was the chief rabbi of Scandinavia. And he wrote a famous book that's studied in all the schools even today. And he was the main speaker.
What was his name?
Zuber, Rabbi Israel Zuber. And that was a very stirring event. And then we continued on. We went into we bought the building on Oakland Street, the Kesser Israel, and then we brought down for the opening one of the big cantors in the world, Kusevitsky, came down. Gave a concert. The city itself has always been so open and warm and helpful till this day.
Tell me about the Lubavitcher Yeshiva today. How many students? Where is it located? What kind of budget does it have as compared to when you were here 50 years ago?
Back in the middle 50s, middle 60s, the late 60s, we had a little fire in the building on Oakland Street. Not in the shul, but in the school building. And the fire was in the middle of the night, so no one was in the building, no one was injured. And it was a fire retardant building. It was contained in one room. And we wrote immediately right to New York to the Lubavitcher Rebbe that we had a fire. And the Rebbe answered 4 words. He said, Binyan Chodesh, go to a new building, B'Shchuna Chadosha, in a new neighborhood. So we knew exactly what direction we had to go. There was never a doubt. We didn't know how it would be done, but we knew exactly. We went to Long Meadow, and we built our new building there. And the enrollment went up, way up over 100 children. And the enrollment went up, and we had national accreditation, and now our budget runs $1 million a year.
And what years does it go from first kindergarten to?
To 8th grade.
8th grade.
Then we started a beautiful class for the children, high school. The high school children come in the evenings or Sunday. We get them besides the regular afternoon school also that we always have. So it's a very wonderful move that we had in our new place.
And you decided to move from Springfield to Long Meadow.
Yeah.
What prompted that?
That's what the Rebbe said. You have a new building in a new neighborhood. There is no other Jewish neighborhood except Long Meadow. There's no other in the area. A lot of miracles on the way. How we got the building, how we built the building. And the city has been very supportive, very, very helpful to us all the years.
Would you tell me the name of your wife and some of the names of your children, so we'll have that also.
Yeah, my wife is Lillian. She's the rabbi daughter from Stockholm.
How did you meet her? How did that happen?
I was in Boston. I was on the way to New York for the holidays. And I had met her father because he was a very well-known personality in the world, and especially in the Lubavitcher world. And I had met him when he came to this country, New York, and then he was sent to Boston to work in Boston. He was a rabbi in the shul, and he was together with the yeshiva in Boston. And I met him once or twice. And then I met the whole family. And her brothers were very good, and I met her, and that's how it came. Yeah. And then their children all grew up here in Springfield. My older daughter Sima was worked for the Con Edison, and she was in charge of public relations for many years. And public relations means you give charity all day long. That was her job. Give out charity to all the worthy organizations in the city of New York. And she made sure that everyone would get. She'd call out the minority groups who didn't know they were even eligible. And she made sure that they would get. They were so happy with her around. And Aradar Chidel made the Lubavitcher cookbook called The Spice and Joy of Jewish Cooking. It's a bestseller cookbook year in and year out. And the oldest daughter, Sima, her husband, is the housing director of the state of New York. And he also is a great patriot, and he joined the reserves as a chaplain many years ago, and now he is a bird colonel. He helps out the country.
And your other children?
The other children, my other daughter, her husband is a teacher in the Lubavitcher Yeshiva in New York, and her children have Chabad houses all over the country. Yeah, as well as my second daughter, Tzitha, also has her children have Chabad houses in California, all over, in Arizona, Chabad houses. And then my son Israel was the rabbi here in the Kesser, and then he went to Florida. And my other son, the Rabbi Joseph, entered the field of banking. And he was the vice president of Bank of America up in Manhattan, and it's another bank. He's right alone. And they all got their background right here in Springfield.
Any other children?
I have about 3 other girls. I have 8 children.
Yeah. Who are the other ones?
The other one is Zlati, is some organization in New York that has to do with helping out poor people, and she does very good with them. Her husband now has a kosher restaurant in Crown Heights. Yeah. And my daughter Shana is the one also has children who are Chabad houses. Chabad house. Her husband is a specialist on furniture. He manufactures furniture. The New York Times ran 2 full pages of a column, 2 full pages in color, the latest in kosher kitchens. And my younger daughter Esther is right here in Springfield. She's to get 100% involved in education. She runs the thing for the whole community.
Are you still teaching? What are you doing now with your...
I am full-time in fundraising. I teach the adult class, the Talmud class, every week.
Where is that located?
That's right in the yeshiva. Right in the yeshiva every Tuesday night. And I deliver the talk every Shabbos morning by the davening. There's a lot to do to keep the school going.
Can I ask what year you were born?
Yeah, I was born January the 1st, 1925.
Kol HaKavod.
Yeah, thank you.
Would you like to anything further you'd like to say before we finish for today?
I want to thank you very much for calling me down and taking an interest in the Jewish life of this community. If you know the background, you know where we descended from, then you know how to go forward in a great way, in a good way, in a happy way, in a successful way.
Thank you. Thank you. What is your name?
Lillian Edelman. I'm the rabbi's wife. And when we first came here was in 1950. And this was the first no, there was another building that they had on Belmont Avenue.
So you started there?
But that's where we came, yes. The building was already there. It was a house that was converted a little bit into makeshift classrooms. And then they bought this building here from the Sinai Temple. Now remember, it was a grand building even then. You walked into the foyer, and in front of the fireplace was a beautiful desk, and the secretary sat there. I don't recall where my husband's office was, but I would imagine it was in a corner because the room is quite big there. This room, from what I hear now, was a kindergarten, and I'm sure that it was just as nice as it is today. And the big place, I don't know what you call that room there now, but that was eventually into a shul on the high holidays. It was a big, beautiful, long room. And then, of course, going upstairs, there were several classrooms. There were lavatories upstairs. And it was also in excellent condition, everything up there. Downstairs was a kitchen with...
you mean on this floor?
No, in the basement.
In the
there was
basement?
a kitchen. Yes, in the basement was a kitchen where the children ate, and we did have a cook. And she made the meals as best as you could. And I think that all of them were, the cooks that we had at that point were all women, of course, that had been through the Holocaust. And children liked it, and they loved the kids.
Do you remember the women's names, the cooks?
I know one was a Mrs. Faye Prizer, and then we had another lady, Faye Horowitz. I don't know which order, but that was 2 of them. And we may have had, and then of course we had some kind of meetings that used to be held downstairs. It was like one big room with a kitchen towards the end. And they did a lot of nice things down there with food, with I think there was a little stage, if I'm not mistaken, where the children also performed. And what else can I tell you? And there were a few classrooms upstairs, 4 classrooms, I believe.
What was your connection to the academy? What was your involvement in all this?
Well, that was the years that I had several children each year, and I didn't really do too much because it was like homebound more than anything else, and we didn't live up in this neighborhood, and I didn't drive at that time, so I didn't come here very often.
So on Shabbos, your husband would walk over here and you'd stay home?
My husband walked. No, at that point there was a shul. At that time there was two Orthodox shuls downtown in Springfield, one on Chestnut Street and one on I forgot the name of the street.
Congress?
There was a Congress also, but Chestnut Street and Dwight Street.
Dwight.
And we used to go to the shul on Dwight Street, which was right
The
across.
Russischer?
That's right, the Russischer.
What do you
shul.
remember of that shul?
That was also a very nice shul. There was a lot of people used to come all the time, and everybody lived within easy walking distance from there.
What was a nigun? Do you remember? What kind of... was it comfortable?
Very comfortable, yes.
How many people would come on a Shabbos?
You know, as a young married woman, it seemed like there was a lot of women all the time. I mean, a lot of people there all the time. And you knew everybody because everybody was a neighbor of yours, whether to the right or the left or across the street, but everybody knew each other. And then there was another shul on the next street over, so it was like one happy family.
The women were up in a balcony? In
Yes,
that
the
shul?
women were on the balcony, yes.
Do you remember if the women had their own seats? Every Shabbos they'd sit in a certain spot, or would they just...
I don't remember that really, but it could be that they had their own seats. I'm not sure.
Was there
about
a
that.
women's organization at the shul too?
Oh yes, they
What?
always had a women's organization. We had an organization here also, the PTO. And one of the women I remember, Mrs. Harriet Brisk, as a matter of fact, she used to come around fairly often because we needed to wash the dishes here after lunch. And she used to tell me that at home she has a woman doing her dishes in hot water, and I come over here, she said, and I help out and I do them in cold water. So that's what she did, but she was a good trooper. And she lives now in Long Meadow, very nice lady.
Who do you remember in terms of the women from the 50s and 60s who were active in this academy?
Well, she was active. There was a lot of elderly women at that time because we used to have an auction every year. It was called something else at that time. A bazaar, it was called. And we had to go around soliciting. And you always had a lot of nice women that used to come with me. And times were that I used to have 2 or 3 of my little kids in the car. And had it been today, I'm sure I would have been arrested every day. I had the 3 children in the car, used to stop on one corner with this woman, whoever I used to go with, and then go 3, 4, 5 blocks and run back to see if the children were okay, and then continue on. Today, it's a no-no. You can't do that. But years ago, it was done very frequently like that. Nobody paid any attention to those things. But there was a Mrs. Goldman that was very active, and Mrs. Diamond was very active, and many other women. And we used to make they used to cook and serve a big meal at that auction also, or the bazaar, whatever. Used to make a few dollars, and it was very nice. People looked forward to that.
When you had Shabbos here, and you had the services here?
I think it was only during the high holidays. I don't know if it was every Shabbos.
Oh.
I don't think so. Because like I said, we went downtown. That's where we lived. And then when we moved up here, I think that this shul had already been sold. This school building had already been sold, I think.
When you had Shabbos at the Russisch Shul, was there a major luncheon with cholent and all that?
You know, I don't remember that because, like I said, I was always with the little kids at home, although we only lived 2-3 minutes away from the shul. And I don't recall exactly what happened with that. I don't know.
Tell me, if you could tell me a little bit about your life. Where were you born? Where are you from?
I was born in Russia. And then in Russia, in what's today, what is it today? The Caucasian Mountains. My father was a Lubavitcher, Chassid, and Rabbi at that point had sent him to there. It was like a real wilderness almost, I think. My mother was very unhappy there. And we stayed there a while, and that's where I was born. And then we moved to Riga in Latvia. And we were there for a few years, maybe 4 years. And then in 1932, we moved to Stockholm, Sweden.
The Rebbe sent you, your father?
Yes, said my father. There was somebody from Sweden had come to Riga to ask the Rebbe that they were looking for a rabbi, and my father got the job there. So we lived there for 15 years in Stockholm.
You were there during the war?
Yes, yes. We left in 1947.
So your father was chief rabbi?
He was. Mm-hmm.
During the war?
Or Orthodox, yes.
Yeah, that must have been quite an experience.
It was an experience, and he was, right after the war until we came here, he was extremely active with all the refugees, especially those women that had lost husbands and did not know where they were, in order for them to be able to marry again. So you needed somebody that knew that they had been killed or died or whatever happened during the war. So my father was very active with that.
And there were places in Sweden, I think, where survivors were taken. And
as a matter of fact, 2 of my sister-in-laws were survivors, and they lived in one of those camps in Sweden. That was called Lidingö, which is the name of, I believe, a specific area in Stockholm. And that's where many of the young refugee women came. And they had a rabbi and a rebbitzin that originally came from Denmark. And they were in charge of all those young women. And like I said, 2 of my sister-in-laws were from the Holocaust.
So, your father was involved in work during the Shoah?
Yes.
In Stockholm?
Yes, he definitely
Has that been
was.
written about?
It has in some of the books, yes. I think we have a book at home about that. My older brother was also very, very taken with that, and he used to run up and down Sweden to speak to people that had come from the war.
What is your father's name?
Jacob Israel Zuber.
And your mother's name?
My mother was Zlati Zuber.
And then after 1947, your father came to America.
We came to America. My father had been promised a job, and the problem was I was a little bit older and needed my own visa. And by the time I got my visa to come to America, that job had been taken. So we came to, like I said, to New York, stayed there for a couple of months, and then we moved on to Boston, and that's where we stayed.
And what did your father do for...
My father was a rabbi in one of the shuls there, and then on New Year's Eve in 1952-53, he was killed. He was going, it was New Year's Eve, and he was going to my brother's, and a few kids evidently jumped him, and he died the next morning.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. And till this day, they never found who did anything, but that's a long time ago.
Yeah. And you were at that point together with the rabbi?
Yes,
you were married,
I was married,
and
yeah.
you were living here?
Yes, I was living in Springfield, yeah. Mm-hmm. I didn't know anything until after he had passed away. Then my brother called me up to tell me.
And your mother was
My mother was a widow, like I said, and she died 7 years later in Boston also. Yeah.
Tell me about your children.
Well, we have, thank God, 8 children. There, 6 of them are in Brooklyn, New York. One daughter lives here, and one son moved recently to Florida.
And they're all very active with the Chabad movement.
Yes, they
them,
are.
yeah.
They're all very active with Chabad. Yes, each and every one of them.
Your father's father Do you know anything about him?
I don't know much about him, but he was also Lubavitcher Chassid. Yes, he was. And lived in Russia, and he was killed by one of the hooligans in Russia at that point.
Really?
Yes, It was just before, a few days before Pesach, and they had said that the Kazakhs were coming, and I think he hid under the table, and then they came in, of course, and picked up the tablecloth, and there he was, and they killed him. So my grandmother at that time was a young woman, and she was a young widow.
And how did she survive?
With difficulties, yet she lived for many, many years in Russia.
With the children, with
children,
your father.
Yes.
Your father was.
No, I think my father. They left in 19. Like I said, in 19.
He was already gone from the house.
Yes,
he was already placed.
Yes.
He was already placed up in Caucasus.
He was at that point. He was going to yeshiva in Lubavitch. And then after that, when he got married, I don't think that either of my parents saw their parents again after they got married. That was a sad thing. Not like today, you get married, you live wherever you are, you can always see your parents and call them and whatnot.
What a different time.
Yes, that's true.
What happened when you went to Scandinavia on the 50th yard site?
My father. Yeah. So first we came to Stockholm, and straight from the plane, actually, we went to our summer home that we had in the Swedish archipelago. And we saw the house where we had lived during the summers, and they all thought it was just wonderful. When we lived there, we could only go there with a boat. But now, of course, they made a causeway, and it was different, but it still looked the same, and all my memories came floating back. And then we went to Stockholm, and we pointed out this where we were, and this was my brother's school, and this is where I went to school, and here's the shul that my father was the rabbi in.
What shul was that?
It was called the Adas Yeshuren, and it's in the same location, and I was sure I knew where it was, but I wasn't quite sure, so I asked the person, where's the Jewish synagogue? He said, there's no Jewish synagogue on this street, because you'll never know it unless you know where it is. So of course we went in, and all the old memories kept flooding back to me, that here's where we used to go bring my father the food for Pesach, because he used to have maybe a kiddush over there, we had to bring him the food, and for Sukkot, especially because we couldn't make a sukkah because we lived in an apartment building. And then we went to the old apartment where we lived, and there was a non-Jewish woman that was there, but she was most hospitable, very, very nice. She let us go into every single room, and here's where we slept, and here's where my brother slept, and so on and so forth. It was very, very emotional. And the children were very, very, very pleased to see what a wonderful life we must have had, and we certainly did that.
Going back there, on a typical Shabbos in Stockholm, how many people would come to shul?
Maybe there were 40, 50 people that came.
This is during the war we're talking
Yeah, this is during, all the years that we were there. They had a very nice shul, and I would say very few people had cars at that time. So most of the people definitely walked. And some of the people really had quite a walk to go to. But Stockholm itself, we tried to walk it also while we were there. And of course, the way everybody walks today, they didn't think it was so far. But at that point, it was very far.
And during the war, did you have many refugees in Stockholm?
Always. We didn't know if we were going to be able to sleep in our own beds, so we would have to sleep some other place. Because my parents, the house was always open to people. Always. We had a big couch that opened up in our dining room, and it was, like I said, when we woke up in the morning, we didn't know who was going to sleep there. There was always people there, like I said.
Do you recall the names of the Jewish organizations that helped the refugees?
Mostly Hayas and the World Jewish Congress. And as a matter of fact, before we moved, I did have a job at World Jewish Congress.
What did you do for them?
Regular office work, and then they suggested I go to Hayas when I come to America. And over there, I was working in Boston in Hayas, and the main thing there was to find Jewish people from Europe that were looking for people living in Boston or wherever it was. Remembering that I managed to match up quite a few people, somehow or other, with the people that were looking for them, which was very interesting.
That must have been emotionally very
It
satisfying.
During the war, some Jewish people from Finland sent their young kid over to live with us for about a year. And then eventually all of them moved to America, and they moved to Boston. So I came in, like I said, to the Hayas, and I saw a name that was very similar to this boy's last name, and they happened to be cousins of theirs. So I made that, so to say, shidduch, if you can call it that. So that was gratifying.
Did you know in Stockholm what was going on in terms of the Shoah? Were you aware of it in 43, 44?
We were.
You knew.
We used to have we always were Shomer Shabbos, but we did have the radio on 24 hours a day just to hear what had happened. And of course it was...
You knew. People,
oh yes,
you knew.
oh yes. We were well aware of whatever the radio said, yes.
Did you live in constant fear that Sweden could be overtaken too?
We did, but I don't think that it was the uppermost in our minds, really. I don't believe so, because Sweden was neutral, so it wasn't anything that... We lived in fear for the people that were over in Europe, in the other parts, not in Scandinavia. But then, of course, the refugees from Denmark came over en masse also.
Was your father involved in that at all?
A little bit, yeah, he definitely was, because he was the rabbi of the shul, so...
And you had to settle these people?
Yeah, that's right, that's right.
What was the response of the Scandinavian people?
Very good.
It was?
Very good, yes. They were very gracious. Excuse me, they were very gracious to everybody that came. Could find homes for them, found apartments for them. And then we had the kinder transport that came from England with a bunch of young people, and there was also very they were treated very well.
They came through Stockholm?
They came through Stockholm.
Can
yes.
you remember this?
Yes.
You can actually remember seeing the kids?
Oh yes, as a matter of fact, one of the girls was a very good friend of ours, and I'm in touch with her even now. She lives in Providence, in Muncie, New York. Married a fellow from Providence, lived there for many years.
And you met her in Stockholm as part of the kinder transport?
Yes, exactly.
But they were on their way to England?
No, they came from England. They came from England.
In other words, the kinder transport went to England, and they were taken from London or whatever and brought to you?
Brought to
Stockholm?
Sweden, yes.
Why?
To Sweden. Well, like I said again, because the country was neutral. And that's why they came there, and they stayed there for several years, and then they moved to various parts of Europe or America.
So it was Hayas who was involved in helping them
Hayas.
They were involved in settling them in Stockholm?
Yes, yes.
Has that been written about?
I think so.
Yeah?
I think so. Yeah.
What became of your father's papers? His speeches, his talks, all these things?
I have a nephew that lives in New York, and I believe he took many of the things. In our house we have several books of my father's, Svarim and whatever, and then one book was printed in Israel of his writings also.
Can you remember his Devar Torahs, your father's?
No, you'd have to ask my husband.
From Boston, he can remember them.
He remembers them from Boston, yes. Yeah. My mother, like I said, when she got married, never saw her parents again. And I remember vividly, one time I came home from school and my mother was sitting with her head down a little bit on a bench. And I said to her, what happened? So she said that she got news that her father had died a month ago. And that, of course, was very upsetting to her. And she had really, most of her relatives were still living in Russia, whereas my father had siblings living in America besides the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So when it came to we should leave Sweden, he wanted to go to America, and my mother really would have gone to Israel. That's where she wanted to go, but America won out at that time. So
And you said your father came here because he wanted to find a match for his two daughters,
something like that.
right? Something like that. Something like that. And your brothers had already married
That's right.
two women in Sweden.
Yes.
Where did your brothers end up?
One brother was in Boston, and they opened up a business, and they did very well. My sister-in-law, she still lives in Boston. My two brothers passed away. My sister-in-law in Boston was embroidery. That was her main thing. And they opened up, from their house, embroidery on let's say the police department, or on a cap they had something, whatever it was. Very, very fine handwork. And my brother was big in export-import. Then they did a lot of karate gear and all gear, whatever you call it, I don't know. So that was their forte. And then my brother passed away. And my other brother, he lived in Muncie for many years. And he was worked from the hospital. He worked with testing. And then I only have one sister-in-law left from two sister-in-laws and two brothers. And I have a sister living in Crown Heights in New York with her family. So that's it.
Are you involved today in some of the different organizations in town? What kinds of things are you still engaged with?
At the moment, I'm not engaged in really very much at all. I'm retired from where I was working, and that's it.
That's it?
Yes.
Do you have any advice to young people today? Looking back on your life and all these experiences, what would you say to young people growing up? What kind of advice would you give them?
You have to be involved in whatever it is. It's you have to try and better yourself, and you have to try and better the communities. And that's what you have to do.
Follow your example. You've
Try.
certainly done that.
Thank you.
Thank you.